In some of my past videos where I remove tampos, I usually get a bunch of comments of other methods for removing them. I also get people from other countries who comment that they don't have access to whatever chemical I'm using, asking what other chemicals might work. And last, I have a lot of younger kids who want to modify their cars without using dangerous chemicals. So in order to respond to these comments, I decided to do a dedicated video on the most popular ways of removing tampos, a sort of guide to what works. You can then take this information and apply it to your customs. Of course, I can't put every chemical in this video that might work, so I've chosen to go with the ones that are most commonly brought up in the comment section and are easy to get at most hardware or box stores. My test subject will be this 64 Impala. I chose it because it has a black tampo on a white painted surface. I find that the black paint that Mattel uses is very difficult to remove compared to other colors. So this car represents a worst case scenario. In fact, what you're watching right now is me trying to remove the tampo with acetone. Most videos on tampo removal use acetone to wipe away the tampo. I don't like using acetone as it tends to cloud the glossy surface of the paint, and more times than not it will eat right through the paint. That's what happened to this car. I made it to the metal before I even got close to getting rid of all the tampo. I also want to note that tampo removal is also very important if you're an error collector. Here on the left, for example, is an error where Mattel forgot to hit this car with a red pad. Or at least that's what I would like for you to believe. In reality, I removed the red paint to create this error. Once again, I'm not trying to say that you should not collect error cars. I own a bunch myself. I'm only saying that you should be aware of how easy it is to make some errors, and tampo errors are very easy to make. So the first thing I'll try is Goof Off. For each car, I'll apply some of the product to a paper towel and then wipe that onto the tampo. I'm familiar with other methods that use empty markers and acetone to scrub off the tampo, but will be avoiding these as it requires extra work. For each chemical, I'll scrub for a few seconds and show the results, and then scrub for 5 minutes off camera. I'll then show the results for every 5 minutes if required. I'll be testing for speed of removal and damage to the underlying paint layer. I'll also be applying some to the windshield plastic just to see how it reacts. Goof Off does a pretty good job of removing the tampo, but unfortunately dulls the underlying paint. This can be rejuvenated by polishing the paint if you so desire. The base paint layer on this car has a lot of pits in it, and I didn't feel it was fair to continue scrubbing to remove the paint in the pits as the other cars didn't have this issue. Goof Off reacts to the soft plastic of the windshield only mildly, so accidentally getting some on the windshield probably won't be too big of an issue. As safety goes, looking up the SDS for Goof Off shows flammable, a health risk, and carcinogenic. The vapors were not overpowering, but should be used in a well-ventilated area. Next up is some Goo Gun. This is not known for removing paint, it's primarily for removing adhesives, but it works pretty good on tampos. The only issue here was time. It took just over 10 minutes to remove the tampo, or most of it. But to be fair, this was the toughest of the tough, so expect it to work better on other tampos. However, it doesn't affect the underlying paint layer, which is a huge plus. It also doesn't affect the windshield plastic all that much, or at all. I believe the windshield on this car was damaged by the abrasiveness of the paper towel going over it hundreds of times, and not necessarily the product. One interesting thing about this car was that the Goo Gun could not completely remove the number 5 for some reason. I will say I've used it on other cars without this ghosting issue. Looking over the SDS for Goof Off, I found that it was flammable, along with a mild health risk due to it containing petroleum distillates. The vapors were not all that bad, but as I'll say in all of these, use in a well-ventilated area. The next item has been brought to my attention by dozens of people each time I remove a tampo, and of course it's the dry erase marker. The way this works is you write over the tampo and then use a cloth or paper towel to remove the marker and the tampo along with it. This definitely works, but it's extremely time consuming to do. Like the Goo Gun, it does not affect the underlying paint, which is great, but also like the Goo Gun, it can't seem to completely remove the outlines of the tampo for some reason. This is another one that I have tested on lesser tampos without any issue. Well, other than the extreme amount of time. I have not tested every marker out there, so some may give better results than others. The nice thing about the dry erase marker is that it is relatively safe when compared to the other items I've been testing, though you should use it in a well-ventilated area. Next up is 91% isopropyl alcohol. This one came as a complete surprise to me, as I figured there was no way it would work. But actually it does, albeit very, very slowly. In fact, I ended up switching to 98.9% anhydrous isopropyl alcohol just to try and speed things up a bit. Anhydrous just means there's no water in it. It helped a little bit, and in about 10 minutes I had most of the paint removed, though it did start to affect the underlying paint, dulling the surface. As before, I'm not sure if the hazing is caused by the chemical or the paper towel being wiped across it so many times. No issues with the plastic windshield, and like some of the others, it probably works okay on your normal everyday tampos. Isopropyl alcohol is pretty common, so you can probably find it in most places as it's used in first aid situations. As far as safety goes, most of us are familiar with isopropyl alcohol. It's flammable, poisonous if you were to drink it, and yes, you should use it in a well-ventilated area. This next one is interesting, or at least it's interesting to me. A lot of people bring up non-acetone nail polish remover for removing tampos. Where this gets interesting is that there is no set chemical makeup for non-acetone nail polish remover. It basically just tells you what is not in it. So the makeup of this chemical can be different from each other. The only thing they'll all have in common is that they don't have acetone in them. This being the case, you can get very different results depending on what brand you're using. Here the blue solution takes some of the Tampo off, but the pink version won't hardly even touch it. This is one that I eventually gave up on after about 15 minutes. It just wasn't removing it in a timely manner. Odds are the people who are recommending this are using a brand with a chemical makeup more conducive to removing tampos than what I'm using here. As far as safety goes, you'll need to read the bottle because they're all made of different chemicals and will have different warning labels. Other than, yeah, you guessed it, they'll all say use in a well-ventilated area. Up next is the ever-popular lighter fluid. To put it simply, it works well and in short order, easily less than 5 minutes. It does not affect the underlying paint in any negative way that I could see. It has a very slight effect on the windshield plastic, but that's not an issue if you are careful. If you're like me and you take the car apart, then it's a non-issue. It also works on the hard plastic cars without damaging the plastic. The only downside is that it's flammable and poisonous, but no more than, say, the isopropyl alcohol from earlier. And if you guessed it said use in a well-ventilated area, well, you would be completely wrong. It doesn't say that anywhere on the bottle, so go figure. Last but certainly not least is Brake Clean. Brake Clean is lighter fluid on speed. It gets the same results in a third of the time. It removed the tampo in about 20 seconds. This added speed comes at a greater cost, however. Brake Clean will destroy the soft plastic windshields if you get any on them. That can be fixed by polishing it out if you like, but you do need to be careful. It doesn't affect the hard plastics Mattel uses for its cars, so you can also use it to remove the tampos from plastic cars with metal bases, just like lighter fluid. As far as safety goes, well, it's not the safest by a long shot. As the label states, it's extremely flammable, right up there with acetone. It also has a very low vapor pressure, so it evaporates in short order, filling the room with vapors that are carcinogenic. So needless to say, it's not for everyone, but it is what I like to use, outside, in a very well ventilated area. Well, I hope this video has been somewhat helpful. Tampo removal is one of the easier ways people modify Hot Wheels or Matchbox cars without taking them apart. Mattel uses tampos to add detail to their cars, to make them stand out compared to other die-cast lines. They've also increasingly been using them for gimmicks. Every car shown in this video has a tampo gimmick to it. These gimmicks can be fun, but if you just want a regular-looking car, then removing them is a must. I should also note that none of these methods work on pop culture cars. These cars have a clear coat over the tampo, so you would need to remove the clear coat before you remove the tampo, which makes it pretty much impossible, as whatever you use on the clear coat will more than likely remove the tampo and the paint under it. As mentioned before, I didn't test every chemical you might or could use. A lot of items you see out there are made up of the same things. For example, Goo Gun you saw earlier probably works because it has petroleum distillates in it. Petroleum distillates is the key ingredient in naphtha. Naphtha is a key ingredient in lighter fluid, only in a greater quantity, and thus is why it probably works better. Also, the faster something works on the tampo, the more destructive it was on the plastic windshield. So there probably isn't a magic bullet chemical out there that can quickly remove the tampo and not harm the paint or plastic. but I could be wrong. If you have the magic bullet and would like to share it with all of us, then please comment below. I have some pretty cool videos I'm working on that I hope to get out soon, including another Mad Max project for those of you who like the Mad Max cars. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.